Hello, it's Milk Games here. Welcome back to the JK.
That was hilarious though. Okay, hello, it's Milgames here. Welcome back to Test Wanted. You can hear my voice again, so get ready for another great video. Let's start with the beginning, I guess. So, on April 24th, 2023, a new member, Mr. Pinball64, joined our Discord server and shared the source code and prototype builds of Test Wanted. Surprised? I created a separate server to organize all the builds and documents. There were more than I realized. Anyway, I hope you visit our community. We love seeing everyone. I also started a series of videos on the prototype builds, which now has... Wait, what? 42 videos! I'll be thrilled if you check them out as well. The documentation was extensive, taking me a whole year to read, but I still had questions. I found the X account of Test Wanted's project manager, John Cartwright, and reached out for the interview. To my surprise, he agreed. I asked the community for their questions, but let's say they were skeptical, until I provided the proof. After gathering their questions, I just continued reading the documentation. Well, I just wanted to be thorough for the interview. After a while, I sent John my questions and waited. To my excitement, he joined our Discord server. The thrill of that moment is indescribable. Wait, what the... Before we begin, do you have anything you want to say in the introduction? Perhaps a greeting, part of your biography, your general attitude towards Test Wanted, etc.
There were a whole bunch of people involved in making Taz Wanted at Blitz Games, so it's not just me. I've been making games for maybe 35 years, starting in the UK on home computers like the Dragon 32 when I was still at school. I used to work for a company called Big Red Software and made ZX Spectrum and Amstrad CPC games like Dizzy Prince of the Yokefolk, Wild West Seymour, and then worked on the PC version of Micro Machines. And code finding on the Game Boy version of Game Genie. I did the code side of Game Genie for Sega Game Gear and Master System, and Game Genie 2 for Sega Mega Drive/Genesis. I was also involved in making code mastering/boot system for Sega Game Gear and Master System games. There are a few Eurogamer articles written by my old school friend Keith Stewart about those times. Me and a bunch of others moved to Blitz Games, then called Interactive Studios, when IDOS shut down Big Red Software. I was working on the game for the movie Titan AE, but that game got cancelled. Then I teamed up with Tony Pavi and Ian Prestige, who were in Team Storm working on Dragon Sword, that sadly never got released. It was kind of a new start for all of us, which is how we ended up being Team Phoenix. Taz was our first game together, and it's genuinely one of the happiest times I had. We worked hard, but we had a good laugh doing it. And I think we built a team that people enjoyed being on. You can find me on LinkedIn and see what I've done over the last 3 decades or so. Currently I run gameconsulting.com.au, where I work with indie developers, publishers, and screen agencies. The past 3 years I've looked after everything for Team 17 down here in ANZ, and produced Dredge, Conscript, Moving Out 2, etc. I joined the project about halfway through as an associate producer to help the larger team and look after the GameCube port. Similar to JC, I have very fond memories of this game, working with the team, the amount of creative freedom we had as well. I ended up staying at Blitz for 12 years and became the studio development director, and was really proud of what we achieved, including other projects I worked on such as SpongeBob and Fairly Odd Parents 2. Since leaving Blitz, I moved to New Zealand, worked at Pickpock, and shipped Into the Dead 2 and Monsters Ate My Metropolis. Before now focusing on music and sound at chrisvigorsmusic.com.
How did Blitz Games come up with the idea to create Taz Wanted?
As I remember it, the company was talking to Infogrames about work for hire. I mean, that's what Blitz did mostly. I can't remember if we were specifically asked to pitch to make a Taz game. I do remember that Bruno Bonnell, then CEO of Infogrames, flew in and came to the office with our agent Jackie Lyons. He talked about how when he did the Warner Bros. Deal, his idea was to make simple games using the license. I know we wanted the games to be about destruction because that's very Taz. I think in the end, when we were brainstorming about it, that Tony Pavi, our lead programmer / technical manager on the team, came up with the idea of the wanted posters and destroying those.
We know that you wrote all the documentation for Taz Wanted, and also managed all the processes inside Team Phoenix. Was there anything else you were responsible for?
My name might be on the documents, but I'm pretty sure Tony, Ian Prestige, creative manager, Scott West, designer, and Owen Quigley, animator, would have been knee-deep in there too. It was a very collaborative team, and I have 1 for second claim credit for everything. My primary role was as project manager, coordinating the team, making sure tasks got done, making sure we delivered milestones, being the primary point of contact for our producer, Henrik, and other folks at Infogrames.
What role did Andrew Oliver and Philip Oliver play in the creation of Taz Wanted?
Philip and Andrew were always involved at a high level in every project, but they probably let us get on with it. They looked at our milestones and builds when we delivered them, and there was a weekly management meeting to go through all projects in the company with them.
What is your favorite level in Taz Wanted? Why?
Maybe the museum. I like that we got to put our spin on a bunch of real art pieces in it. I always loved Mondrian's work, but I'd never seen it for real. About 6 years ago, when I was in Cologne for Gamescom, I saw a real Mondrian in the museum there.
From the project checklist document, we learned the exact dates when milestones number 1 to number 7 were released. Unfortunately, at this point we have labeled them as lost. Can you tell us something about them, and why these particular milestones were labeled pre-production, and why milestone number 7 is already full production?
I think that was likely a contractual thing with Infogrames. Back then I remember a lot of the publishing deals had pre-production periods where they wanted developers to implement a certain amount of game features. Then they'd review and decide if they wanted to continue with the rest of the project.
Can the PC version of the game be called a port of the PS2 version? When did your team start working on the PC version of the game? Right after milestone number 1 or later?
No, not at all. We used our own internal BlitzTech engine to make Taz and other games. This allowed us to develop on PC and consoles simultaneously. Back then, PS2 dev kits were expensive, and we probably only had 1 or 2 on the team, and it would likely be Tony who had that. So most of the work was done on PC from day 1. We had USB adapters for PlayStation 2 controllers, so we could build and test on PC. We'd regularly make sure it ran on PlayStation 2, and at least weekly we'd get Tony to do a build and burn a DVD that we could run on PlayStation 2 test kit. They were much cheaper than dev kits. To begin with, I'm pretty sure Infogrames only wanted it for PlayStation 2. I think the desire for other platforms came later in development.
Do you remember the approximate date you started working on the Xbox and GameCube ports?
Not specifically, but I do remember Infogrames asking if we could do a feasibility study into Xbox and write a technical report on it. I think they were nervous about whether we'd be able to get it running or not, and wanted to have one of their technical directors review our documentation before agreeing to add it to the contract. Because we were using our own BlitzTech and another team had already done an Xbox launch title, Fusion Frenzy, it was actually pretty easy for us. So instead of writing up boring and pointless documentation, we just did an Xbox build, put it on disk, and sent it to them. They didn't want the technical documentation after that. I think GameCube came in last, and that was absolutely more of a job than the Xbox version. Chris Vigors, associate producer, and Ian Hickman, programmer, looked after that one, taking all the code assets and staying in sync, but making whatever changes were necessary to get it running on the GameCube. The GameCube, I think, started around the end of 2001 or very early 2002, I think. The PS2 version was quite near the end, but we did have to share code and assets across the platforms. Luckily, the tech allowed for that quite well, as I remember.
Judging by the documentation, the GameCube port was a huge challenge for the development team. Can the same be said for the Xbox port?
The Xbox port was pretty straightforward. It didn't need any textures or geometry changes, as it was on par or more powerful than the PlayStation 2. Obviously, there were more platform-specific standards for Xbox, so it wasn't no work, but it wasn't a huge drama. Everyone's used to cross-platform development with Unity and Unreal these days, but it was less common back then and a real strength of Blitz Games as a developer. The GameCube port was a real technical challenge. The key issue with the GameCube was that it only had 24 megabytes of main memory, Splash, and 16 megabytes of secondary memory, ARAM, usually treated as audio memory. Although this sounds like more than the 32 megabytes of memory compared to the PS2, the speed and use of these two were totally different. The game engine took up 4 megabytes of main memory straight away, so we had to try and fit the whole game into 20 megabytes. That was initially impossible, but after some profiling we figured that our collision cache was around 8 to 10 megabytes of data, and we moved that to the ARAM. This was super tricky as the ARAM was a lot slower and the bus quite different, so moving things in and out of those two buckets in a stable way was a huge challenge. I do remember having some very random crashes due to memory fragmentation with this, so leaving the game running overnight for days would result in a crash at some point that we couldn't track down. That doc also shows the difference between big and little endian data structure between PS2 and the GameCube. A programmer will know more, but how data is stored between the two is different at a low level, so converting the code to take account of this was another challenge. We also spent a lot of time compressing the textures, as that is usually another place where a lot of memory can be saved, and our tech allowed us to do this without affecting the PS2 version. I think I might have recompressed the music and sound again as well, as every megabyte was an important saving back in those days. I was/am a huge GameCube fan, so I was super proud of this version and have it as my first solo Blitz project.
Hold on a sec. Okay, after that I need to explain something to you. Let's talk about the incomplete load issue. This occurs when a player enters a level, but not everything loads properly. The loading bar may not reach the end, and the game shows 0 out 0 destroyed signs in the pause menu. So, why am I bringing this up now? I think that Wix just explained why this bug is happening. Let me explain it more clearly. Wix said that they faced significant hurdles due to the GameCube's memory limitations. The main memory was 24 megabytes, which was used for code, splashes, etc. The second memory, or ARAM, was 16 megabytes, which was typically utilized for audio. Although the total may seem adequate compared to the 32 megabytes on the PS2, the way this memory was accessed was vastly different. The game engine alone consumed 4 megabytes, leaving only 20 megabytes for the rest of the game. To address this, the developers had to move substantial data, such as the collision cache, to the slower ARAM. This may also explain why in GameCube milestone number 2 we have a problem in Looney Lagoon, where the collision of some objects doesn't load. This transition was complicated and led to potential memory fragmentation, which... Oh no, don't tell me you don't know what memory fragmentation is. Okay, well, this was best explained by Steve Chazap on Stack Overflow. Imagine that you have a large 32 bytes expanse of free memory. Now allocate some of it, 5 allocations. Now free the first 4 allocations, but not the 5th. Now try to allocate 16 bytes. Oops, I can't, even though there is nearly double that much free. Okay, I guess now I can continue. So, this transition was complicated and led to potential memory fragmentation, which could cause unpredictable behavior in the game. If the game was left running for extended periods, as Wix said, it led to crashes, or, in our case, incomplete loading of levels, directly linking the incomplete load issue to the memory management challenges described by the developers. Okay, let's continue. Do you remember what was in Tony's scene and Claude's scene?
These were test levels for programmers Tony and Claude. It's where they would have worked on features outside of the main levels. That's where Tony would have done all the collision code and Claude would have done all the experimental work on spinning TAS, etc. They'd often be working closely with Owen or one of the other animators later on implementing features in those test levels.
Why was all the cutscene music sped up? For example, that's the original song from the music CD. And that's how it sounds like in the game.
Looks like that footage is from an NTSC version of the game. NTSC runs at 60 Hz and PAL runs at 50 Hz. I wonder if we just didn't bother compensating for the difference? I remember this very well. We developed the game in NTSC for the majority of the time, which was really common for most teams as we're delivering milestones to a US-based publisher, so they would need to see NTSC. Once we were close to the end of the project, we started building for PAL, which normally is just a quick change with little impact. However, this time it was not smooth. The cutscenes were scored as a single audio file with music and sound effects on them, so the new frame rate was out of time compared to the file. I had to spend quite a few long days cutting up the files, re-triggering things, speeding up audio to make PAL-specific assets for that build. Whew! This was less than ideal, but we were under time pressure, and at the time, Blitz did not have an internal audio department, so we couldn't get Nimrod to make changes in time/cost for this.
Originally, Tweety was supposed to help TAS throughout the game, if the player had a difficult time getting through. In milestone number 12, you made Tweety fly around TAS 12 times, but then that was cut from the game. Was it difficult to implement from a gameplay design standpoint, difficult to program, or did you just decide that brief instructions from Tweety at the beginning of the level and on the map were better than what you had originally intended?
It was probably to do with Tweety clipping through lots of the geometry, and arguably because it would have added a cost to the VO to record lots of lines.
Why was Daffy Duck cancelled and Tasmania turned into one single level?
We were struggling a bit to meet our schedule in terms of the amount of content/levels, etc. As I remember, the suggestion to cut the Daffy Docks level came from Infogrames, so we wouldn't slip any farther. I don't think the game really suffered from cutting it. I don't remember it being our strongest design.
What technical limitations and issues with Infogrames or Warner Bros. Did you encounter while developing Taz Wanted?
I guess the biggest challenge was getting art/animations approved by Warner Bros. To be honest, I think the relationship that Infogrames had with Warner Bros. Was really good, and we had some great conversations with Charles Carney, who I think was involved with some of the classic Looney Tunes. Like any brand, they're protective of it and don't just let you do anything. I'm pretty sure we had to do a bunch of revisions to Taz and other characters to get their approval. And you know we weren't allowed to give Yosemite Sam guns, hence he ended up with finger guns. And we were lucky enough to create some new characters, like the polar bears, that were not from existing Looney Tunes cartoons. Outside of that, we tried to use characters from the Looney Tunes universe throughout the game. The obvious ones like Daffy, Yosemite Sam were well known, but the zookeepers came from old cartoons too. I remember that whilst Taz was a 3D model, we struggled with him spinning. Nothing that was built quite looked right, and the transition from standing/running Taz to spinning Taz looked wrong. In the end, I think it was maybe Claude Deroux who coded the whirling/spinning effect that we ended up shipping with. I also remember that we had Elmer Fudd speaking in the game cutscene on the original script, but then learned that recording just the 2 to 3 lines of dialogue for him would be something like $10,000. So we rewrote the scene so that just as Elmer starts to talk on the mic, Daffy interrupts him. That ended up being funnier, I feel.
What do you think about Taz Wanted? What was the easiest, difficult part of developing the game?
I enjoyed working on it a lot. It was hard work, and there were a bunch of folks on the team who were new to games. But I look back on that time with very fond memories, and I'm in touch with almost all of the team to this day. We were a pretty tight team. We'd stay late to play Counter-Strike or Midtown Madness on the Studio Network quite a bit, and we'd socialize together quite a lot too. I remember a friend from a different team saying that the impression of Team Phoenix is that the atmosphere was like we were all at the pub having a laugh whilst we worked. If that's anyone's memory of it, I'd be happy with that. We were one of the earlier fully cross-platform games at Blitz, so we got a lot of support from the internal tech team who made Blitz Tech. The coders would probably remember better than me, but when we started the project, I don't think we had everything in place tech-wise. We were trying to find out what we could do with PlayStation 2, as none of us had worked on it before, I don't think. I feel like we did struggle a bit to pull the design together. Blitz historically didn't have designers per se. The view was that the whole team designed the game. For whatever reasons, job titles at Blitz at the time were a bit wonky in my view. The lead programmer on a team was called the technical manager, and the lead artist/art director was called the creative manager, which always made me think of design more than art, and I think confused a bunch of the publishers we worked with. So I think Scott West was possibly the first person in the company to have the title design coordinator. He'd previously worked on another team in the studio in QA, but got laid off when the project got cancelled. You'll remember better than me. Tony, Pesty, and I were arguing that we needed a dedicated designer on the team because it was an important project for the company, and the compromise we came to with the Oliver twins was that we could have a design coordinator, because that still sort of meant that the team were all involved in the design of the game. They suggested Scott, so he came back in and did some paper-level designs for us. None of us had worked with him, but we liked what he did and he came on board.
Why didn't Team Phoenix adapt the game engine for vector graphics, and instead used low-quality bitmaps based on vector graphics?
So, Pesty, Ian Pestridge, used Zara, a vector art program, to create textures and output them as bitmaps, as did the other artist. The levels were made out of polygons with textures applied. Each level on Taz was loaded into memory in its entirety. There was no streaming of the levels in the game. The PlayStation 2 was much more powerful than the PlayStation 1, but it was still pretty limited in terms of video RAM and power. So, we needed to limit the texture size because we had the level geometry, all the objects and characters to fit in. It would have looked nicer for sure if we used polygons like the vectors and the textures, but I doubt we'd have memory to do it. It would have made the mesh way more complicated, and I don't know that the PlayStation 2 could have handled it, and I'm pretty sure the GameCube wouldn't. Also, bear in mind that when we made it, the consoles were connected to TV with composite or component cables, not HDMI, and the screen resolution was a lot lower, so we didn't think the textures looked bad.
Was Cartoon Strip Mine programmed by a different person? A lot of things at that level work differently than they work elsewhere. The minecart sign cannot be destroyed by passing through its location on the minecart, instead of being destroyable just by touching it, like Haunted's roller coaster sign. Drowning respawns you near Tess' last position on solid ground, instead of on the nearest respawn point, etc.
I can't remember if it was Tony or Claude who coded the minecart. I remember they were very fashionable in games like Crash Bandicoot, etc., and I think we felt we should have a minecart level. But as you say, the controls and the rules for respawning, etc. were very different. It's probably the least consistent part of the game.
How should the update button in the game's PC launcher work?
Wow, I haven't seen that in years. I think that was just like a repair install button in case you deleted files. There was no live updating of the game or anything like that.
Is there any technical reason at all why there is such a long game save on the PS2 and Xbox? On PC and GameCube, the text with saving the game doesn't appear at all.
That's probably to do with how PlayStation 2 and Xbox games had to be saved at that time. The memory cards weren't very big, and I don't think access to them was very quick either. I feel like part of the process might have been verifying the save too, so that would have added time.
Why can you skip Blitz games, Infogrames, and Warner Bros. Splash screens on PC and Xbox versions of the game, but you can't do that on the PS2 and GameCube?
That's most likely because that was part of the standards that PlayStation 2 and GameCube games had to adhere to if they were to be approved. There were loads of standards that each platform had about displaying when games are saving, loading, if you disconnected a controller, etc, etc. Yeah, I think that was due to the standards from Nintendo, so showing the Ninty logo and other company logos were not allowed to be skippable at the time.
Why was all the music converted to mono on PC instead of the original stereo soundtrack like on consoles?
I can't remember the exact reason, and to be honest, I don't remember it being in mono, but I'm not doubting you. But I'd guess it was to do with PCs having very variable specs. The interactive / multi-stream music was streamed from the CD, and on all the consoles, we knew exactly the spec / speed of that drive. But on PC back then, you could have had a slow CD drive, and it might have struggled to stream the music properly.
Actually, the mystery of mono music is still unsolved, because the whole game was installed directly on the hard disk, and doesn't really use CDs for streaming music. Maybe they were afraid that the game weighted too much by those standards, but it's too hard for me to judge, because, for example, GTA San Andreas, released a month later, weighted 3 times more. What's wrong with the sounds in the game? Why did you use low quality sounds? 8000 Hz, 11025 Hz, 22050 Hz, instead of the original 44100 Hz sounds, even for Taz himself.
Probably to do with streaming performance from disk. The multi-stream interactive music was streamed from the disk, and I think some or all of the sound effects were too. At one point there were 4 streams of interactive music, but we couldn't get it to reliably work from disk, so that was cut down to 3. It's probably all related to that. This was quite common, definitely a combination of the disk performance and audio memory. Music will have been streamed from the disk itself, and we had 3 stream adaptive music going, which blended between the music based on Taz either tiptoeing, walking, or spinning. I'm pretty sure this was really one of the first interactive music systems around at the time. For sound effects and voices, these are loaded into memory. I think we reserved 4 megabytes of memory for sound effects. 44Hz stereo sound is around 10 megabytes per 1 minute. 22 kHz sample rate and below is usually done for sound effects at the time to help. That sample rate works for most effects unless they are very high or low in the frequency spectrum, and we'd likely go lower on larger levels where more sound effects were needed, and depending on how important or often the player heard the sound.
We found PC, PS2 PAL and NTSC, and Xbox PAL demo versions of the game with only Looningdales. Have you released Xbox NTSC or GameCube demo versions of the game with Looningdales, or perhaps other demo versions with other levels or worlds?
I don't think we did. I'm not sure there was any retail magazine that featured GameCube demo discs, so we didn't do one.
We know that Nimrod Productions wrote all the music for Taz Wanted. Recently, the authorship of the music has been attributed directly to Mark Cunningham. Is it correct to do so?
Mark Canham was the director of Nimrod Productions, so I guess so. I'm pretty sure Rich Aitken was also involved there, but it's been a long time.
Did you check the 16:9 aspect ratio during development? This is supported even on the PS2, but there are quite a few problems with some cutscenes.
Pretty sure Phil Palmer, programmer, looked at it. Back then, 16:9 wasn't commonly supported on PlayStation 2, but we put the option in. It doesn't surprise me that there were some visual issues with cutscenes, they were all authored for 4x3. I think Phil did an experimental 3D mode as well that you needed the red-blue glasses for. I'm not sure if that made it into any shipped versions.
Yes and no at the same time. This mod can be enabled via cheat codes, and I have the right glasses for it, but for some reason I don't see it as the 3D I'm used to. Perhaps you know why the TOS-mounted files were so hardly encrypted? To remind you a bit, all the archives were encrypted with their own algorithm. The situation was so serious that even within these archives, all the files in them are encrypted as well, and each type has a different encryption, except for the .lom file, which stores information about all the objects, triggers, etc. in the level.
I'm not sure if that was part of our BlitzTech middleware and how it bundled files/assets.
Well, it's not actually BlitzTech, is it? I thought that Babel isn't BlitzTech, but I can be wrong about it. From my perspective and from your documentation, my basic theory was that you just had a Babel game engine which you tweaked a little bit for each game you worked on.
Yeah, so the name Babel was obviously a reference to the Babelfish translator from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the premise was that we could take code assets and translate them across multiple platforms. Nerds are going to nerd, so BlitzTech compromised a bunch of things. And there were specific tweaks that our tech team put in at the request of the game teams. But the details are hazy, I'm sorry. I think it might have only started being called BlitzTech when the company started licensing it out to other studios. In case you didn't know, House of the Dead Overkill was made using BlitzTech, but not developed by Blitz.
Bless you, John. It actually revealed a lot of things I had not thought about before. So Babel is an early version of BlitzTech that was used only inside Blitz games. When you realized that this game engine was ready for other developers, and it had been seriously improved, you probably had detailed documentation on how to use it. You rename it to BlitzTech. It's really interesting.
To be honest, I don't think many of us inside the studio were particularly enamored with the idea of licensing it out because of the potential drain of technically supporting other developers. And I don't think that happened until after I'd left anyway. But it was official middleware for consoles, and around this time there was no Unity on consoles. There were a lot of proprietary engines by developers, along with renderware from Criterion before EA bought them, and stuff like Gamebryo. John Wiggum, who founded the tech team in Blitz, was hugely forward-thinking about middleware and targeting multiple platforms. The initial work was all on PC before we got the first prototype PS2 or Xbox kits. But the idea was that we could edit and develop primarily on PC, and know that we could deploy the same code/assets to consoles in the future. John Wiggum has been working at Unity for some years now, funnily enough.
Who are missing and wanted personas that can be found in Looney Tunes?
On the right-hand side, that's Chris Southall. His nickname was Snowy.
What does IP Hard CT mean in Tarzland?
Huh, IP is Ian Prestige, and CT was his then girlfriend, now wife.
Where is Bugs Bunny?
I can't remember if we simply didn't want to include Bugs or whether we were told not to include him.
Can you think of any Easter eggs that we probably don't know about?
I'm not sure that I'd ever made it into a build you have, but we wanted to have an Elvis Taz. Infogrames was very concerned that we'd get sued by the estate of Elvis Presley, as they were apparently notoriously litigious. Not so much as an Easter egg as a deception, but I'm pretty sure when you spin that Taz doesn't move as fast as you think. I remember we had some issues with control/collision and the size of the maps if he was moving too quickly. But we made it feel like he was moving quicker by altering the field of view. It's especially pronounced when the camera moves from side to side. I'm not sure if it shipped with the Xbox version of the game in the end, but I remember one of our programmers creating a new Taz idle animation that if you left him alone long enough, a digital watch would appear on his arm and he would look at it, and the camera would zoom in and the time shown would be the console system time. It was very cool.
It was the first time I heard of Elvis Taz. It makes sense that it didn't make it into the release version, but it's not an documentation either. About Taz spin, it seems to be done so well that I don't even see it. And here we go again with the cheat codes. Nope, the clock didn't make it into the Xbox release version as an idle animation, but it is available via cheat codes on all platforms. Did the devs plan a sequel to the game?
On Team Phoenix, we'd already moved on to making Fairly Odd Parents break into rules, but there was another team inside Blitz that wanted to make another Taz game. It didn't happen though. I do remember doing a demo using the Taz model and lighting inside a realistic urban environment similar to Space Jam styling. That might have been part of a pitch for another Looney Tunes style game, I think.
Were you planning on releasing Taz Wanted on Steam when it became popular?
No, back then it really was all about retail sales and not digital downloads. If I remember rightly, Steam didn't start taking third-party games until 2005 or something. The game was long finished by then.
Did you post any information about Team Phoenix gallery in Smithsonian Museum? Why has your face been replaced by a coyote hair?
I don't think we ever posted anything about it. That picture is of a badger glove puppet, not a coyote. That was my Counter-Strike name.
How did the marketing of Taz Wanted work? We only know about 3 commercials. That's the first one.
This is the story of the most wanted guy in the galaxy.
That's the second one. And that's the third one.
For the devil in all of us, now there's a game that feeds it. Taz Wanted. Bad habits have never been this much fun. Rated E for everyone.
Infogrames dealt with the game differently in Europe versus the US. That was fairly common back then, with different branding and campaigns in different territories. That's why there's different box art between PAL and NTSC territories. I prefer the PAL box art, I think we all did, to be honest. I don't remember seeing any of those videos, especially not the Infograin commercials. The Blitz Games video was likely produced in-house at Blitz, but probably by our internal marketing folks to show other publishers our capabilities. Maybe some of the other guys remember better than me? I do remember that Infogrames shipped me out to Madrid for 2 days to present the game at the Warner Bros. Theme park there. I think John sent me, thanks. And I presented it alongside other games such as Back in Action. That was a cool experience, but quite nerve-wracking for a new associate producer.
How did it happen that IGN got a build that's 3 months older than the release build? In this review, we see a screenshot of the game where Iceberg still has red buffs in it. The last build of the game that had them is beta number 9, which came out on February 1st, 2002.
It might be that they were given old out-of-date screenshots to use in the article. That used to happen a lot back then. The PR marketing teams would be the ones talking to the press, not us.
We recently came across the Chinese version of Taz Wanted. Is it official? Are there any other official versions of Taz Wanted for other countries? Or any collector's editions that we don't know about?
I've never seen that before, but the disc and packaging looks genuine. I don't think we ever did Chinese localization in-game though. I'm not aware of any collector's editions, I just have my normal retail copies.
What was your biggest regret after Taz Wanted was released?
I don't think I had any regrets after we finished it. It was a bit of a slog at times. This was back when crunching to finish games was pretty much the norm, and sadly we did do that. But overall, I was pretty happy with what we did with the resources we had. I mean, looking back at it now, with another 20 plus years experience, there's loads of things I'd do differently, and I'm sure everyone on the team would say the same. Most of the team rolled straight on to making our next game together, and continuing to work with that team was hugely important to me.
Have you ever seen speedruns or other Taz Wanted video content?
Yeah, a few years ago I came across a complete playthrough video series on YouTube. It blew my mind that someone would do that and upload it to YouTube, and then the comments from people saying they remembered playing it as a kid, etc. I mean, I really enjoyed making the game, working with the team. We had a blast, but you don't really think that anyone else is going to have fond memories of the game.
Are you still in touch with any of those involved in the development of Taz Wanted?
Yes, quite a lot of them actually. I have lived in Australia for the last 20 years, and earlier this year I was back in the UK. I went to Leamington Spa, where Blitz was based, and caught up with the Olivers, Pesty, and a bunch of other folks he used to work with. Scott West came to work with me at THQ Studio Australia about 19 years ago, returned to the UK for a bit, but has been back down here in Brisbane for the last 5 years or so. I catch up with him very regularly. And Viggs, Chris Viggers, lives over in Wellington, New Zealand. When I go to NZGDC every year, I catch up with him. I'll give you some pictures. Dan, I've asked these folks to contribute to these questions too.
You ordered the design of this Flash from Artifact, but were these Flash games actually developed by Team Phoenix, and what was in them?
The Flash game was on a marketing website, I think. We didn't develop them.
Do you know who is still supporting the official Blitz Games website?
I don't, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was the Oliver twins.
What a darn interesting interview! I really hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you have any questions left, feel free to write them in the comments. I read everything you post. Also, don't forget to smash that subscribe and like buttons. They keep releasing the same quality videos. An interview with the designers of Taz Wanted will be released soon as well, so expect it for sure. Milgames was at the mic. Peace. Right after milestone number 7. Neven? Wait, what? I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda. Can the PC version of the game be called a port of the PC? It's PS2! God damn, why you can't just... When did your team start working on the PC version of the game? Right after milestone Right after milestone number 9. I said number 9 again. What the? The loading bar may not reach the end, and the game shows. Now try to locate 16 bytes. Oops, I can't. I can't. No, I can't. This transition was complicated and led to potential memory fragmentation, which could cause unpredictable behavior. Yeah, that's it. It led to crashes, or in our case, incompleting. We are freaking bleeding. What did I say?
Me and a bunch of others moved to Blitz Games, then called Interactive Studios, when IDOS shut down before Me and a bunch of other... Hold on. The game engine took up 4 megabytes. The game engine took up... In the end, I think it was maybe Claude Deroux. I'm going to assume I said that right. Should I be reading your lines? I don't know, fuck it.